The words lawyers and grandparental rights didn't just echo in my mind. They ricocheted like bullets in an empty room, shredding the fragile peace I had spent years trying to build. My mother had delivered this chilling pronouncement just weeks before the holidays, a calculated strike designed to bring me to my knees. It was a declaration of war, a terrifying promise to drag me back into the suffocating cycle of subservience I had fought so hard to escape. My heart pounded with that old terrible rhythm, the drumbeat of dread that accompanied her every move, the absolute certainty that she would not stop until she had consumed every ounce of my autonomy. I spent every waking moment waiting for the subpoena, flinching at every ring of the telephone, preparing for a battle that felt impossible to win against a woman who weaponized guilt like a master swordsman. Yet as the sun rose on Christmas morning, the apocalypse she promised failed to materialize. A silence unlike anything I had ever known enveloped our home, thick, heavy, and unnervingly peaceful. There were no manic phone calls screaming for attention, no last-minute demands disguised as gifts, no looming criticisms waiting to ambush us over breakfast. Mark and I sat amidst the wrapping paper, exchanging looks of bewildered, fragile hope, waiting for a storm that simply wasn't happening. This unprecedented peace, born from my absolute refusal to engage in her drama, felt both terrifying and profoundly liberating. Could it be that the only way to win was to simply stop playing her game? But to understand the weight of this silence, you have to understand the scream that preceded it. The ringtone was a generic, cheerful chime, the kind pre-installed on every smartphone. But to me, it sounded like an air raid siren. It sat on the granite kitchen island, vibrating violently against the stone, demanding attention. My stomach performed its familiar acrobatic routine. A sudden clench, a drop, and then a lingering nausea that tasted like sour metal. It was my mother. For 34 years, my existence had been defined not by who I was, but by who she needed me to be. There was a silent, invisible contract inked in my blood the day I was born, a binding agreement that stated my emotions, my time, and my sanity were secondary to her whims. Her narcissism wasn't a loud, crashing storm. It was a pervasive, suffocating blanket. It was the heavy fog that dampened sound and obscured direction, making me question if the path I walked was ever truly my own. I stared at the screen, the name glowing bright, Mum. "Are you going to answer that?" Mark asked gently. I jumped, nearly dropping the dish towel I had been gripping, white-knuckled. My husband stood in the doorway, leaning against the frame with that weary, compassionate look that had become his default expression whenever December rolled around. "I have to," I whispered, the words automatic. "It's about Christmas." "You don't have to do anything, Sarah," he reminded me, though his voice lacked the sharp edge of judgment. He knew the complexity of the web I was caught in. I slid the green icon across the screen and pressed the phone to my ear, instantly composing my face into a mask of pleasant compliance. "Hi, Mom." "You didn't pick up on the first ring." Her voice came through, crisp and laced with that deceptive sweetness that barely covered the accusation underneath. I was worried. One hears such terrible things on the news these days. "I was just drying the dishes, Mom. Everything is fine." "Well, I hope you're not too busy to discuss the menu." She plowed on, ignoring my explanation. "I've decided against the roast beef. It's too pedestrian. We'll do a goose this year. And Sarah, please ensure the children have appropriate attire. Last year, Leo's shirt was a shade of blue that frankly clashed with the tablecloth. It ruined the photos." I closed my eyes, feeling the familiar weight settling onto my shoulders. Christmas wasn't a holiday in my mother's house. It was a theatrical production where she was the director, the star, and the critic, and the rest of us were terrified understudies who hadn't seen the script. "A goose might be hard to find on short notice, Mom," I ventured carefully. "And the kids just want to be comfortable so they can play with their cars." "Comfortable?" She cut in, her tone dropping a freezing octave. Christmas is about tradition, Sarah. It is about standards. If you want to raise your children to look like vagrants, do so on your own time. But in my house, we show respect. Unless, of course, coming to see me is such a burden that you can't be bothered to make an effort. There it was, the pivot, the weaponization of guilt, the implication that my reluctance to hunt down a goose or force a 5-year-old into a stiff collar was tantamount to abandoning her. "No, Mom, of course not," I said, the lie tasting like ash. "I'll find the goose, and I'll check the kids' clothes." "Good. I knew I could count on you. You're the only one who really tries, you know. Your sister certainly doesn't care if I have a heart attack from the stress." She kept talking, listing demands disguised as casual preferences, while I stood frozen in my kitchen. The joyous, chaotic warmth of the holiday season that I sallallahu alaihi wasallam in movies or at my friends' houses felt like a different planet. My holiday was a gauntlet of anxiety. It was a minefield where I had to anticipate her needs before she voiced them, ensuring the temperature in the room was right, the conversation never veered toward topics she disliked, and that my praise for her efforts was effusive and constant. When the call finally ended, I placed the phone down as if it were made of fragile glass. My hands were trembling. Mark walked over and wrapped his arms around me from behind, resting his chin on my shoulder. The physical contact was grounding, a tether to reality. "Goose?" he asked dryly. "Goose," I confirmed, letting out a breath that was close to a sob. He turned me around, so I had to look at him. "Sarah, look at yourself. You're shaking. It's December 2nd. You have 3 weeks of this left and then the day itself." "I can't help it, Mark. You heard her. If I don't do it, she spirals. She attacks everyone. It's easier to just manage her." "Is it?" Mark asked softly. "Is it easier? Or is it just what you've been trained to do?" He gestured toward the living room, where our 2 children, Leo and Mia, were building a lopsided tower of blocks. Leo asked me yesterday why Grandma doesn't like his laugh. Apparently, she shooshed him last Thanksgiving because he was too shrill. "They're starting to notice, Sarah. They're starting to feel the tension you carry." The statement hit me with the force of a physical blow. I had always told myself I was the shield, that by absorbing her toxicity, I was protecting my family. But a shield that is constantly vibrating with impact eventually transmits the shock to whatever is behind it. "I don't know how to stop," I confessed, my voice barely a whisper. The thought of saying no to her, it feels like I'm setting the house on fire. It feels like a betrayal. "The only person you're betraying right now is yourself," Mark said, his hands moving to cup my face, his thumbs brushing away a tear I hadn't realized had fallen. "And maybe us. We want a Christmas with you, Sarah. The real you, not the stressed out, terrified version that she creates." I looked into his eyes, seeing the unwavering support that I so often took for granted. He wasn't asking me to fight a war. He was asking me to put down my weapon. He was offering a glimpse of a different kind of life. A holiday morning spent in pajamas, eating pancakes that weren't scrutinized for texture, laughing without checking the volume, breathing air that didn't feel thin and recycled. A tiny, fragile seed of resolve cracked open in my chest. It wasn't a fully formed plan, and the fear was still a roaring current beneath my skin. But for the first time, the fear of continuing this way began to outweigh the fear of defying her. "I don't want a goose," I said, my voice trembling but distinct. Mark smiled, a sad, hopeful curve of his lips. "I don't want a goose either. I want pizza or turkey or whatever makes you happy." I looked back at the phone. It was silent now, but its presence still loomed. The contract was old, ancient even. But as I looked at my husband and my children in the other room, I realized that contracts could be broken. The cost would be high. I knew her rage would be nuclear, but the cost of keeping it was becoming something I could no longer afford to pay. The calendar hanging on the kitchen wall had transformed from a simple tool of organization into a looming threat. Every morning, as November bled into December, the red circle date of the 25th seemed to pulse like a fresh bruise. In years past, this anxiety would have paralyzed me, turning me into a frantic marionette dancing to strings pulled from 3 towns away. But this year, something was different. The change was microscopic at first, born of a late-night conversation with Mark, where the exhaustion finally outweighed the guilt. He hadn't told me what to do. He simply held my hand across the dining table and whispered that I was allowed to exist for myself, not just as an extension of her expectations. That permission, granted by the one person who Sallallahu Alaihi Wasallam the toll it took on me, planted a seed of defiance. It wasn't a roar, but a whisper, yet in the silence of my subservience, it sounded deafening. The first test came on a Tuesday, a grey afternoon that smelled of impending snow. The phone rang, piercing the quiet of the house, and the caller ID flashed the word "Mother." My stomach performed its usual gymnastic tumble, a reflex honed over 3 decades. I picked up, expecting the usual prelude, but she skipped pleasantries entirely. "I need you to drive me to the garden center," she announced, her voice crisp and devoid of question marks. "I need to select the poinsettias before the good ones are picked over. Be here in 30 minutes. I stood by the kitchen island, gripping the granite until my knuckles turned white. Mark's voice echoed in my head. "Small steps." "I can't today, Mother," I said. My voice wavered, thin and reedy, but the words were there. The silence on the other end was absolute. It was a vacuum designed to suck the resolve right out of me. Usually, this was the moment I would crumble, apologizing profusely and grabbing my keys. "Excuse me?" she finally said, the tone dropping 10 degrees. "I don't think I heard you correctly." "I said I can't today," I repeated, forcing my lungs to expand against the tightness in my chest. "I have work to finish and the kids will be home early. You'll have to ask Aunt Sarah or take a taxi if it's urgent." "A taxi?" She spat the word as if it were a profanity. "I am not taking a taxi to buy Christmas flowers, plain and simple. If you are too busy to help your mother, then perhaps I just won't have flowers this year. Everyone will know why the house looks barren." "I'm sorry you feel that way," I said, reciting the script I had practiced in the mirror. "But I am not available this afternoon." I hung up before she could respond. My hands were trembling so violently, I had to sit on the floor, leaning back against the dishwasher. I waited for the sky to fall, for a lightning bolt to strike the house. But the kitchen remained quiet. The refrigerator hummed. The world continued to turn. I had said no, and I was still alive. The victory, however small, was intoxicating. It gave me the fuel for the next hurdle, the Christmas Eve menu. For as long as I could remember, Christmas Eve was a rigid production of poached salmon and dill sauce, a dish my children detested and Mark merely tolerated. It was her favorite, therefore it was the law. A week later, during our obligatory Sunday call, she began listing the grocery requirements she expected me to purchase and prepare. "And make sure the salmon is wild caught this time," she instructed. "The farm-raised filth you bought last year was mushy." I took a deep breath, looking at Mark, who gave me a subtle nod from the sofa. "Actually, Mother, we've decided to do something different this year," I said. "Since the kids are getting older, we want to start a new tradition. We're going to make homemade pizzas and have a movie night on Christmas Eve." "Pizza?" The incredulity in her voice could have shattered glass. "On Christmas Eve? Have you lost your mind? That is peasant food. It is not festive." "It's what the family wants," I said, emphasizing the word family to mean the people living under my roof, not her. We want a relaxed evening without the stress of a formal dinner. We'll save the big meal for Christmas Day at your place." "I have never heard of anything so ridiculous," she snapped. "You are stripping the holiday of all its dignity. What will I tell my sister when she asks what we ate? That we ordered takeout like teenagers?" "You won't have to tell her anything because you're welcome to join us," I offered, keeping my tone level despite the pounding in my ears. "But we are having pizza." "I certainly will not be eating dough and cheese," she said icily. "I will eat at home, alone, since my preferences clearly don't matter." "That's up to you," I replied. The guilt was there, a sharp pang in my gut, but it was duller than before. I was reclaiming my kitchen one slice at a time. The final and most terrifying boundary, however, involved the children. 2 weeks before the holiday, she came over for an inspection. She called it a visit, but we knew better. She sat in her designated armchair, her eyes scanning the living room for dust, before landing on my 7-year-old son, Leo, who was happily building a Lego fortress on the rug. "Leo," she barked, "look at you. Your shirt is untucked and your hair is in your eyes. You look like a street urchin. Come here so I can fix you." Leo shrank back, his joy evaporating instantly. He looked at me, eyes wide with the familiar apprehension that I remembered from my own childhood. "And you?" She turned her gaze to my daughter Maya. "Have you gained weight? That sweater looks awfully tight around the middle. You need to be careful, or you'll end up heavy like your father's side of the family." The air left the room. Mark started to stand up, his jaw set, but I put a hand on his arm. This was my dragon to slay. I walked over to where she sat, positioning myself between her and the children. My heart was hammering against my ribs like a trapped bird, but a cold, hard anger had crystallized in my stomach. "Mother," I said, my voice low but steady. "Stop." She looked up, blinking in genuine surprise. "Excuse me?" "You will not speak to my children that way," I stated. I didn't frame it as a request. "Leo looks fine. He is playing in his own home, and you will never, ever comment on Maya's body again. She is 10 years old." "I am simply looking out for them," she scoffed, straightening her skirt. "Someone has to teach them standards, since you clearly—" "I mean it," I interrupted, cutting through her defense. "If you cannot treat them with kindness and respect, then this visit is over. I will not have them insulted in their safe space." For a moment, the only sound was the ticking clock on the mantel. Her face went through a complex series of contortions: shock, indignation, and finally, a cold, stony mask. The frost settled over her features, stiff and unyielding. "I see," she said quietly. It was a dangerous tone, the sound of a drawbridge pulling up. "You've become very sensitive lately, very aggressive." "I am being a mother," I replied, "just as you always claimed to be." She stood up slowly, smoothing her coat with aggressive precision. She didn't look at the grandchildren. She looked at me with eyes like chips of flint. "I think I'll leave now. I clearly am not welcome here." She waited for me to beg her to stay, to apologize and plead for forgiveness. It was the dance we had performed 1,000 times, but I remained rooted to the spot. "If that's what you want," I said. She walked to the door, her back stiff with martyrdom. As the door clicked shut behind her, the silence that followed wasn't heavy or oppressive. It was clean. I turned around. Mark was smiling, a look of profound pride on his face. Leo went back to his Legos, the tension draining from his small shoulders. I let out a breath I felt I had been holding for 30 years. The fallout would come. I knew that. Her silence would be weaponized. The Christmas gathering would be fraught with passive-aggressive comments and icy stares. She was tightening her grip, preparing to punish me for these transgressions. But as I looked at my family, safe and happy in the living room, I realized the cracks in the facade were real. I had found a sliver of self-preservation, and for the first time in my life, I wasn't going to let it go. The ringtone was the specific one I had assigned to her years ago, a jarring, urgent trill that I had never gotten around to changing. It cut through the quiet Sunday afternoon like a siren, instantly triggering a somatic cascade of adrenaline and nausea. My hand trembled as I reached for the device, my body betraying my resolve before I had even uttered a word. I had only sent a text message 20 minutes prior, a polite, firm note declining her demand to host Christmas Eve dinner at our house, citing the baby's sleep schedule. It was a small boundary, a microscopic reclamation of space, yet the phone vibrating in my hand felt like a live grenade. "Hello?" I answered, my voice smaller than I intended. "I hope you're happy," she spat, dispensing with pleasantries. Her voice was ice and iron, the tone she reserved for my greatest transgressions. "I pour my life into this family. I sacrifice everything to make the holidays magical, and this is how you repay me? With selfishness? With disrespect?" "Mom, I just said we can't do dinner because I don't care about your excuses," she screamed, the volume distorting the speaker. "If you can't be bothered to respect my wishes, if my presence is such a burden to you and your husband, then fine. Have it your way. There will be no Christmas at all." The declaration hung in the air, absurd and terrifying in equal measure. She was unilaterally cancelling a holiday because I wouldn't cook a turkey. "Mom, that's not what I..." "Don't you dare try to backpedal now. You've made your position clear. You want me out? I'm out. Don't expect any gifts. Don't expect to see us. And don't bother coming over on the 25th. You have ruined this for everyone." The line went dead. I stood in the middle of the kitchen, the phone still pressed to my ear, listening to the silence. It was the silence of a vacuum sucking the oxygen out of the room. I felt the familiar crushing weight in my chest, the conditioning of 3 decades telling me that I was bad, I was ungrateful, I had destroyed the family harmony. Tears pricked my eyes, hot and stinging, but she wasn't done. The phone pinged, then again and again, a machine gun staccato of notifications. I cannot believe I raised a daughter so cruel. "Do not think you can keep my grandchild from me just because you are spiteful. I have spoken to your father. We are looking into our rights." My blood ran cold. The messages were escalating with dizzying speed, morphing from emotional guilt, tripping to tangible threats. "If you attempt to alienate us, we will involve lawyers. Grandparents' rights are a real thing in this state. Keep pushing me, and you will see just how far I am willing to go to protect that baby from your instability." The room spun. I dropped into a kitchen chair, gasping for air. Lawyers? She was threatening to sue me for access to my 3-month-old daughter because I said no to a dinner party? The leap in logic was psychotic, but the fear it induced was primal. Aisha Allahu alayhi wasallam. A flash of courtrooms, of strangers analyzing my parenting, of my mother's charming, weeping face convincing a judge that I was unfit. She knew exactly where to strike. She knew that my daughter was the only thing I loved more than I feared her. "What is it?" Mark walked in, drying his hands on a dish towel. He, sallallahu alayhi wasallam, my face drained of color, eyes wide with panic, and crossed the room in 2 strides. "Is it the baby?" "Read it," I whispered, shoving the phone across the table as if it were contaminated. "She's calling a lawyer. She says she's going to sue for visitation." Mark picked up the phone. His brow furrowed as he scrolled, his eyes scanning the wall of text that continued to grow even as he held the device. He read in silence for a long minute. When he finally looked up, his expression wasn't one of fear. It was disgust. "She is losing her mind," he said flatly. "This isn't about the baby. This is about control. She's throwing hand grenades because you locked the gate." "But what if she does it, Mark? Grandparents' rights? I've read about that. What if she takes us to court? I was hyperventilating now, the panic attack fully taking hold. I have to fix this. I have to call her back. I'll tell her we'll host. I'll apologize. It's not worth this. I reached for the phone, desperate to surrender, desperate to make the monster go back to sleep. Mark's hand came down gently over mine, pinning it to the table. No, Mark, you don't understand. I do understand, he said, his voice steady, anchoring me. I understand that she is terrorizing you. I understand that she is threatening to sue us because she didn't get her way. Think about that. She is threatening legal action against her own daughter to force compliance. If you apologize now, if you cave to this, you are teaching her that this works. You are teaching her that if she threatens to take our child, we will obey. I stared at him, my chest heaving. He was right, but the alternative felt impossible. So what do we do? Scream back? That's what she wants. She wants a fight. We don't fight, Mark said. He picked up my phone, pressed the side button, and powered it down. The screen went black. We do nothing? Nothing? Silence, he declared. We don't explain. We don't defend. We don't beg. We don't justify why we can't host dinner. And we certainly don't acknowledge the legal threats. We act as if she is screaming into a void. She'll come over, I whispered, the old terror resurfacing. She'll pound on the door. Then we don't answer it. We keep the doors locked. If she refuses to leave, we call the police. But we do not engage. The concept was alien to me. My entire life had been a cycle of managing her emotions, anticipating her moods, and frantically sweeping up the debris after her explosions to keep the peace. Silence felt like negligence. It felt dangerous. In my childhood home, silence was interpreted as insolence, punishable by days of cold shoulders or screaming lectures. I can't just ignore her, I said weakly. You can. And for the sake of our daughter, you have to. Mark pulled me into a hug, his arms forming a protective cage against the world. She is betting on your fear. She knows exactly which buttons to push because she installed them. But we aren't playing her game anymore. The only way to win a tug of war is to drop the rope. We sat there for a long time. The house was quiet, but my mind was a cacophony of catastrophic scenarios. I imagined her driving over, her face twisted in rage. I imagined the summons arriving in the mail. Every creak of the floorboards sounded like her footsteps. But hour by hour, the sky failed to fall. Mark made dinner, moving with a calm deliberation that helped settle my frayed nerves. We ate in the living room, the powered-down phone sitting on the mantel like an unexploded bomb. I kept glancing at it, waiting for it to somehow turn itself on and scream at me. She's waiting for me to call, I said, picking at my food. She's sitting by her phone right now, getting angrier and angrier. Let her, Mark said. Her anger is not your responsibility. Let her sit in it. Let her feel the consequences of her own behavior for the first time in her life. By 9 o'clock, the initial adrenaline dump had left me exhausted. I felt hollowed out, brittle. I walked over to the mantel and looked at the black screen of my phone. The urge to check it, to take the temperature of the beast, was a physical itch. I wanted to know if she had apologized, or if she had escalated to calling my friends, or if she was currently posting vague, victimized status updates on Facebook. I reached out, my finger hovering over the power button. Then I looked at the baby monitor. On the small screen, my daughter was sleeping soundly, her chest rising and falling in a peaceful rhythm. She had no idea that her grandmother had weaponized her existence earlier that afternoon. She was safe. She was calm. If I turned that phone on, I would be inviting the chaos back into our home. I would be letting my mother's voice penetrate the sanctuary we were trying to build. I pulled my hand back. Leave it, I said aloud, surprising myself. Mark looked up from his book and smiled. Leave it. We went to bed without resolving the conflict. It was a terrifying sensation, leaving a wound open and untended. I lay in the dark staring at the ceiling, waiting for the guilt to consume me. But as sleep began to pull at the edges of my consciousness, I realized something profound. The fear was still there, yes. But for the first time, I wasn't scrambling to fix what she had broken. I wasn't apologizing for things I hadn't done. The silence was heavy, but it was mine. I had chosen it. She had cancelled Christmas to hurt me, to make me beg for its reinstatement. But in the quiet of that room, with my husband breathing beside me and my daughter sleeping down the hall, I realized she had accidentally given me a gift. She had given me permission to opt out. There would be no Christmas at her house. And for the first time in 30 years, the thought didn't bring sadness. It brought relief. The silence was the loudest thing in the house. For the first few days following the fallout, I carried my phone around like a grenade with the pin pulled, waiting for the inevitable explosion. I flinched at every notification, my heart hammering against my ribs whenever a generic ringtone cut through the air. I expected the barrage of guilt-tripping texts, the voicemails ranging from weeping waif to vindictive matriarch, or the flying monkeys dispatched to demand my surrender. But the screen remained dark. The notifications were just emails about holiday sales or friends confirming dinner plans. It was a terrifying, hollow sort of quiet at first. It felt like the calm before a tsunami, the receding waters sucking the air out of the room before the wave crashed down to destroy everything. I found myself pacing the living room, checking the locks and looking out the window, convinced she would simply show up on the doorstep to reclaim her narrative. "You're shaking," my husband said one evening, gently taking a half-folded towel from my hands. "She hasn't called. It's okay." "It's a trap," I whispered, unable to meet his eyes. "It has to be. She's waiting for Christmas Eve. She wants to ruin it when it hurts the most." "Or," he said, pulling me into a hug that felt like a fortress, "she's giving us exactly what we asked for, even if she doesn't mean to. Let's just breathe." By December 23rd, the phantom vibrations in my pocket began to fade. The dread that had tightened my shoulders for decades started to loosen, replaced by a strange foreign sensation, relaxation. Our home, usually a staging ground for anxiety where I frantically scrubbed baseboards and curated a perfection that would never be good enough for her, began to transform. It shifted from a minefield into a sanctuary. We decided to bake cookies. Not the intricate architectural gingerbread masterpieces she demanded, which always ended in tears and criticism about my icing technique, but messy, lopsided sugar cookies. The kitchen, usually a war room of stress, became a playground. Flour dusted the countertops like snow, and music played loudly, drowning out the ghost of a critical voice in my head. I watched my daughter smash a glob of green dough onto a tray, laughing as she added far too many sprinkles. In years past, I would have swooped in to fix it, terrified of the scathing comment my mother would make about sloppy work or the lack of discipline. But in the safety of this silence, I just laughed. I grabbed a handful of sprinkles and added to the mess. The cookies came out of the oven slightly burnt on the edges and shaped like indefinable blobs, and they were the most beautiful things I had ever seen. We ate them warm, standing over the stove, without a single comment about calories or presentation. Christmas Eve arrived and the sky didn't fall. The sun went down, the lights on the tree began to twinkle, and the phone remained silent. We sat in the living room, watching a movie wrapped in blankets. I looked around at my family, my husband, my children, and sallallahu alayhi wasallam, something I hadn't recognized in years. Ease. Their shoulders weren't hunched. They weren't glancing at me to gauge my mood, because my mood wasn't being dictated by a third party's emotional volatility. "This is nice," my son mumbled, half asleep against my arm. "It's quiet." "It is," I replied, the realization hitting me so hard it brought tears to my eyes. It really is. The morning of Christmas Day was the true turning point. I woke up without the knot in my stomach. There was no dread about the timeline, No panic about the roast being too dry. No mental rehearsal of how to deflect her passive-aggressive comments about my parenting or my home decor. We opened presents in our pajamas, taking our time. There was no performance. There were no gifts given with strings attached. No boxes containing subtle insults. Like the year she bought me a gym membership and a book on finding your potential. The gifts under the tree were genuine tokens of love, chosen because we knew each other, not because we wanted to mold each other. I sat with a cup of coffee, watching the chaos of wrapping paper on the floor, and waited for the guilt to come. I waited for the crushing weight of honor thy mother to suffocate me. I waited to feel like a bad daughter for enjoying a holiday while she was presumably alone or spinning a tale of victimhood to anyone who would listen. But the guilt didn't come. Instead, a profound clarity washed over me. For 30 years, I had believed that peace was something I had to earn through compliance. I thought if I just tried harder, bought better gifts, cooked better meals, or anticipated her needs faster, we could have a happy holiday. I had spent a lifetime chasing a moving target, sacrificing my own family's joy on the altar of her ego. The laughter in the room swelled, a genuine belly-deep sound that bounced off the walls. My husband caught my eye across the room and raised his mug in a silent toast. He shallallahu alayhi wasallam it too. He shallallahu alayhi wasallam, the woman he married coming back to life, unburdened. This unexpected outcome revealed a truth that was as dazzling as it was painful. The chaos wasn't the world or the season or me. It was her. The anxiety that had tainted every major memory of my life wasn't a defect in my character. It was a response to her presence. Peace was possible. It was right here, tangible and sweet, smelling of pine needles and burnt sugar cookies. And the most shocking realization was that this peace didn't exist in spite of her absence. It existed because of it. I looked at my phone one last time, sitting on the side table, dark and silent. I didn't reach for it. I didn't check to see if she had texted. For the first time, I didn't care. The silence wasn't a punishment she was inflicting on me. It was the greatest gift she had never intended to give. I took a deep breath, filling my lungs with the air of a home that was finally, truly mine, and turned back to my family. The peace we had fought so hard to establish felt fragile, like a thin layer of ice over a turbulent river. While the daily screaming matches and intrusive phone calls had ceased, a darker, colder silence had taken their place. My mother had not disappeared. She had merely changed tactics. The emotional outbursts were replaced by cold, calculated emails, mentioning grandparents' rights and vague insinuations about my capacity to parent. Every time my phone buzzed, my heart hammered against my ribs. Every time I looked at my children playing in the living room, a wave of nausea would wash over me, bringing with it the terrifying image of police officers taking them away, handing them over to the woman who had tormented me my entire life. The fear was paralyzing. It wasn't just anxiety, it was a primal terror that gnawed at my bones. To her, my children were not people. They were assets, pawns on a chessboard she felt entitled to command. I couldn't sleep. I found myself double-checking the locks on the doors and peering through the blinds at every passing car. I knew I couldn't live like this, waiting for the axe to fall. I needed to know where I stood. I needed to know if the sword hanging over my head was real or just a trick of the light. I made an appointment with Mr. Sterling, a family law attorney known for his ruthlessness in custody battles. Walking into his office felt like walking into his surgery. The air was cool, sterile, and smelled of mahogany and old paper. I sat in the leather chair across from his massive desk, my hands trembling as I pulled a thick manila envelope from my bag. It contained everything. The printed emails, the transcripts of voicemails where she detailed my instability, and the threats of legal action she had forwarded to me. I need to know if she can do it, I whispered, my voice barely holding steady. She says she has a case. She says she can prove I'm unfit because I have a history of depression, which she caused, and that the court will grant her custody because she has the financial means to provide a better life. Please, just tell me the truth. I need to prepare my children. Mr. Sterling didn't speak immediately. He adjusted his glasses and began to read. The silence in the room was deafening. I watched his eyes scan the pages, looking for a wince, a frown, or a nod of agreement that would signal the end of my world. 5 minutes passed, then 10. My palms were sweating so profusely I had to wipe them on my jeans. I was reverting to the scared little child I used to be, waiting for an authority figure to confirm that I was indeed the failure my mother always said I was. Finally, he stopped reading. He closed the folder, took off his glasses, and rubbed the bridge of his nose. He looked up at me, his expression unreadable. "Is this all of it?" he asked. "Yes," I stammered. Is it bad?" Mr. Sterling let out a short, sharp breath that was almost a scoff. He leaned forward, clasping his hands on the desk. "Let me be very clear with you," he said, his voice deep and resonant. "In my 30 years of practicing family law, I have seen many attempts at intimidation. What you have here is not a legal case. It is a work of fiction." I blinked, unable to process the words. "But," she said. "I don't care what she said," he interrupted firmly, though his eyes were kind. "In this state, grandparents' rights are incredibly difficult to invoke. They are reserved for cases where the parents are incarcerated, deceased, or proven to be severely abusive by Child Protective Services. You are none of those things. The fact that you have sought therapy for depression actually proves you are a responsible parent taking care of your health. It is not grounds for losing custody. It is frankly irrelevant to her claims." He tapped the folder with a single finger. "These emails, these threats, they are baseless. Legally, she has no standing. She has zero chance of taking your children. If she filed this in court, a judge would likely throw it out before lunch and potentially sanction her for wasting the court's time." The world seemed to stop spinning. "Zero?" I asked, my voice cracking. "Zero," he confirmed. "These are not legal strategies. These are scare tactics. She is using legal terminology she doesn't understand to frighten you into submission. It is a bluff, a hollow, empty threat designed to make you panic." For a moment, I couldn't breathe. I stared at the folder, the object that had been the source of my nightmares for weeks. I had endowed it with so much power. I had let it dictate my happiness, my security, and my sanity. And it was nothing. It was smoke. Then the realization hit me like a physical blow to the chest. It wasn't just that she was wrong. It was that she knew what this would do to me. She knew that threatening my relationship with my children was the one button she could push to destroy me. She didn't want custody. She didn't want the responsibility of raising toddlers. She wanted me to be afraid. She wanted me to be small, compliant, and terrified, just like I was when I was 10 years old. She was willing to destabilize my children's lives, willing to make their mother a nervous wreck, willing to burn down our sanctuary, all for the sake of maintaining a leash on me. It was a level of cruelty I hadn't let myself see until this very moment. She just wanted to scare me," I said, the words tasting like ash in my mouth. "Control," Mr. Sterling corrected gently. "It is always about control. And the moment you realize the gun isn't loaded, she loses that control." I left the office 10 minutes later, stepping out into the blinding afternoon sun. The city sounds, the traffic, the distant chatter of pedestrians sounded sharper, clearer. I walked to my car, but I didn't get in immediately. I leaned against the door and looked up at the sky. The fear that had been a tight iron band around my chest snapped. It fell away, leaving behind a raw, aching emptiness that was quickly filled with a cold, righteous anger. But beneath the anger, there was something else. liberation. For years, I had seen my mother as a giant, a titan who held the keys to my reality. I thought she possessed a power that I could never defeat. But she was just a person, a sad, manipulative, desperate person who had to resort to lies to keep people in her orbit. Her weapons were illusions. Her threats were dust. I got into the car and started the engine. I looked at my reflection in the rearview mirror. The eyes staring back were different than the ones that had looked into the mirror that morning. The haunted look was gone. "You have no power here," I whispered to the empty car, addressing the ghost of her that had lived in my head for so long. I drove home not with the frantic urgency of a fugitive, but with the steady pace of a guardian who knows the castle walls are impenetrable. The monster under the bed had been dragged into the light, and it was nothing more than a pile of old rags. I was free. The realization didn't hit me like a lightning bolt. It settled over me like the slow, inevitable creep of dawn, burning away the fog that had obscured my vision for decades. I sat at the kitchen table, my hands cupped around a mug of coffee that had gone cold an hour ago, staring at my phone. It lay there on the wooden surface, black and silent, yet it felt like a live grenade, a conduit for the poison that had seeped into every crack of my life. For years, I had believed that if I just explained myself better, if I just loved harder, or if I just absorbed enough of her pain, she would finally see me. But looking at the device now, I understood the truth. I was fuel for a fire that would never be satisfied, and if I didn't step away, that fire would consume my children too. Mark walked into the room, his footsteps quiet. He didn't speak immediately. He just placed a hand on my shoulder, his thumb rubbing soothing circles into the tension knotting my muscle. He knew. We had cycled through this crisis 100 times, but the air felt different today. It wasn't the frantic panic of damage control. It was the heavy, solemn stillness of a final decision. "I can't do it anymore, Mark," I whispered, my voice trembling not with fear, but with the sheer magnitude of what I was about to say. "I'm cutting the cord. For real this time." Mark pulled a chair out and sat opposite me, searching my eyes. "No contact? Are you sure you're ready for the fallout?" "The fallout is happening anyway," I replied, finally looking up at him. "Whether I stay or go, there is chaos. But if I go, the chaos stays over there. If I stay, I bring it into this house. I bring it to our kids." The decision was made, but the execution felt like amputation. I picked up the phone. My fingers felt numb, detached from my body as I unlocked the screen and navigated to her contact. There she was. "Mom." A word that should have meant safety, warmth, and sanctuary, but instead triggered a Pavlovian response of nausea and adrenaline. I took a deep breath, inhaling the scent of our home. Lemon polish and the faint sweet smell of the oatmeal the kids had eaten for breakfast. I anchored myself in that reality. I didn't send a long explanatory letter. I didn't offer a manifesto of my grievances. I had learned the hard way that words were just ammunition to her, twisted and fired back with lethal precision. Instead, I pressed the small I icon next to her name. I scrolled down to the bottom, past the history of missed calls and sporadic guilt-laden text messages. "Block this caller." The prompt asked for confirmation, a final chance to retreat into the familiarity of the abuse. I closed my eyes, picturing my daughter's face the last time my mother had snapped at her. The confusion, the hurt, the dimming of her light. That image was the steel in my spine. I pressed block. It wasn't enough to just block the number. I had to seal the perimeter. I went into my email, setting filters to divert her address directly to the trash, unread. I logged into social media, systematically removing not just her, but the flying monkeys, the aunts and cousins who acted as her spies and enablers. One by one, I severed the digital tendrils she used to siphon my energy. With every click, the invisible vice around my chest loosened, just a fraction. When I finally set the phone down, face down, my hands were shaking violently. "It's done!" I breathed out. The first few days were agonizing, a different kind of torture than I was used to. It was the torture of anticipation. I flinched every time the doorbell rang, half expecting her to be standing on the porch, screaming demands. I checked my blocked folder in a moment of weakness, only to stop myself, realizing that peeking behind the curtain would only let the monsters back in. The silence from her end was deafening because my brain had been wired to expect the explosion. I was waiting for the other shoe to drop, for the punishment that always followed my acts of autonomy. But then, a week passed, then 2, and the silence began to change. I was in the living room one Saturday afternoon, folding laundry, when I realized I was humming. It was a small thing, a mindless tune, but it stopped me in my tracks. The ambient hum of anxiety, the low-level buzzing of, "What if she calls? What if she's mad? How do I fix this?" was gone. In its place was just space. I looked over at the play corner. My son was building a towering structure of magnetic tiles, and my daughter was orchestrating a complex tea party for her stuffed animals. They were loud, they were messy, they were joyfully, unapologetically taking up space. Usually, I would be hovering, shushing them, terrified that their noise would disturb a phone call, or that their mess would be fodder for my mother as criticism during a drop-by. But today, I just watched them. The silence I had created wasn't empty. It was full. It was filled with the sound of plastic tiles clattering to the floor and the giggles that followed. It was filled with the absence of judgment. Mark came in from the garage, wiping grease from his hands. He stopped when he, Sallallahu Alaihi Wasallam, me sitting on the floor, just watching the kids. He sat down beside me, leaning back against the sofa. "You look different," he said softly. "I feel different," I admitted, leaning my head on his shoulder. "I feel light." I didn't realize how heavy the shield was until I put it down. I spent so much energy trying to defend us, trying to manage her emotions. Now that I've just built a wall instead, I don't have to fight anymore. "You got your life back," Mark said, kissing the top of my head. "We got you back." That evening, the realization crystallized fully. We were sitting at the dinner table, a chaotic affair with spaghetti sauce on faces and overlapping stories about school and bugs found in the garden. I looked around the table, seeing the vibrant, uninhibited faces of my family. I realized that for the first time in my life, I wasn't looking over my shoulder. I wasn't mentally drafting an apology for a crime I hadn't committed. I had spent my entire life trying to win a game that was rigged against me. I thought if I played hard enough, smart enough, kind enough, I could win the prize of a mother who loved me unconditionally. But the prize didn't exist. The game was designed to drain me. The most powerful act of self-preservation wasn't a confrontation. It wasn't a screaming match or a legal battle. It was simply disengagement. It was the refusal to play. By blocking her, by erecting that impenetrable shield, I hadn't just protected my children. I had freed myself. I walked to the window and looked out at the street. The sun was setting, casting long, peaceful shadows across the lawn. Somewhere out there, she might be raging. She might be spinning narratives of my cruelty to anyone who would listen. But it didn't matter. Her storm was raging in a teacup, and I was no longer in the cup. I was here on the outside, breathing air that tasted sweet and clean. I turned back to Mark and the kids, a smile spreading across my face. Not a forced smile of appeasement, but a genuine expression of a soul finally at rest. I was unshackled. I was free. And for the first time, the future didn't look like a minefield. It looked like an open road.